This is WPIX TV New York.
On the Independent News tonight, how the U.S. convinced the Soviets to return to the arms control bargaining table. In focus, the new generation gap, how the high divorce rate is affecting relations between grandparents and grandchildren. An amazing medical breakthrough for hemophiliacs, and the big Thanksgiving Day parade in New York. Good evening, I'm Brad Holbrook. Pat Harper is off tonight. On this Thanksgiving Day, there is a new ray of hope that the threat of nuclear war may someday be diminished. Washington and Moscow have announced they are ready to lay the groundwork for a fresh start in arms control talks. President Reagan is calling it the first step on a long and difficult road. And as Jeff Kamen tells us, the Kremlin has found a way to come back to the bargaining table without losing face.
As a result of exchanges in the past 8 weeks between President Reagan and Chairman Chernenko of the Soviet Union, I'm pleased to inform you today that the United States and the Soviet Union have agreed to enter into new arms control negotiations.
Even as President Reagan's national security advisor was announcing the January 7th meeting between Secretary of State Shultz and Foreign Minister Gromyko, the Kremlin was stressing that the talks are absolutely new talks on nuclear and space weapons and are not a resumption of the suspended missile negotiations.
The Soviet Union walked out of the old arms control negotiations in Geneva, Switzerland a year ago after our country began stationing new missiles in Western Europe. The Russians engaged in a campaign of propaganda designed to intimidate the NATO countries, but they continued to accept the American rockets. The level of tension between Moscow and Washington increased during the past year.
As the U.S. election approached, President Reagan invited Soviet Foreign Minister Gromyko to the White House and told him that the competition between the two superpowers must be peaceful. That same week, Mr. Reagan proposed a new approach to arms control. He called it umbrella talks, taking in the full range of arms control issues. But the Soviets had insisted that no negotiations could take place until the United States withdrew all its new missiles from Europe. Behind-the-scenes diplomacy during the 8 weeks since the White House meeting has apparently produced a major Soviet concession.
There are no preconditions.
When Shultz and Gromyko meet, they will be deciding on the agenda of the arms control talks to come. Reducing Russian land-based missile strength is a top Reagan administration priority. The Soviets are worried about America's new space satellite killer system and the president's idea of a space-based defense against Russian rockets, the so-called Star Wars system. Paul Warnke, a tough critic of Reagan administration arms control policy, is optimistic.
I think it sounds very good. I think the principal thing is the idea that neither side is setting any preconditions.
Did the president's Star Wars program push the Russians back to the negotiating table?
In my opinion, the Russians have been ready to deal ever since 1981. I don't think they've been holding back. I think they've seen nothing that had any substance for them. All of the approaches that we have made would have left them worse off than with no agreement whatsoever. Now, obviously, the fact that we can do something that they don't want us to do, namely go ahead with a strategic defense, is an incentive for talks.
Mr. Reagan's national security advisor, Robert McFarlane, says the agreement to meet in Geneva in January demonstrates the commitment of the two superpowers to reduce the level of international tension. But McFarlane cautions us not to expect too much. No milestone was reached today, just the beginning of a long and difficult process. For the Independent News, Jeff Kamen at the White House.
In what's being called a major technical triumph, British and American scientists have reproduced a pure version of Factor VIII, the substance that causes human blood to clot. BBC reporter James Wilkinson explains this new medical breakthrough.
The new Factor VIII has been produced by a combined effort of British and American scientists. The first step was to find out exactly what chemical Factor VIII is, and for this they needed to purify it from ordinary blood. Scientists here at the Royal Free Hospital had to use no less than 10 tons of blood to get enough Factor VIII to work on. That's equivalent to a swimming pool full of blood. And from all that, they produced just this amount of pure Factor VIII, 1/1000th of an ounce. But it was enough to enable scientists to work out its structure accurately. Once they knew this, it was only a short step to make the chemical by genetic engineering. The artificially produced substance seems identical with the natural product. 2 months ago, a haemophiliac dog in Cambridge was treated with it, and it seemed to work. Human trials will start next year.
Yes, I hope
the new pure Factor VIII may well be available in 2 or 3 years. For many haemophiliacs, it will mean a virtual end to their problem. It will be available in such large quantities, they'll be able to take it regularly, instead of only when they start to bleed. And because it's free from any virus contamination, they will no longer be frightened that the treatment they need to keep them healthy could actually cause them harm.
And the new Factor 8 is expected to eliminate the risk that hemophiliacs and other people have of contracting AIDS or hepatitis through blood transfusions.
The Independent News, brought to you by Preparation H and by the Remington Microscreen Shaver.
And they were afraid. They backed off. They didn't want to be with their grandparents.
President Reagan celebrated Thanksgiving with a turkey feast at his California ranch, but one member of the family was missing. Michael Reagan, the adopted son of the president and his first wife, Jane Wyman, was not invited. Why not? Well, in a recent interview, Nancy Reagan claims that father and son are not on the best of terms, but Michael tells a different story. He says there is no estrangement. He also claims that his stepmother resents him, and he wants Nancy to apologize. Baking cookies together, walking in the park, playing special games. Those are some of the little joys grandparents share with their grandchildren. But in these complicated 80s, divorce has not only strained the nuclear family, it has taken its toll on the extended family as well. In tonight's In Focus report, Karen Hasby reports on why many grandparents are turning to the courts to try to keep their family ties.
I remember when Edith came to the first group, and she said, "It really feels like an amputation."
Marjorie Slavin leads a counseling group for people who've been denied access to their grandchildren. She's talking about Edith Engel, whose daughter had a nervous breakdown and left her family 7 years ago. Edith's son-in-law remarried and now refuses to let Edith and her husband see or even talk to their daughter's children.
The reason he doesn't want his children to have a relationship with our family is that we remind them of their mother. I have been in therapy, and many of us have also had counseling of one nature, and it is considered the more healthy experience for children to remember.
The specifics of each case in this group are different, but the pain is the same.
The fear that they can't wait until the grandchildren grow up and seek them out because they might not be here at this rate. There's a lot at stake.
49 states, all but Nebraska, currently allow grandparents to petition a court for visitation rights after a divorce or death in a family. Activist groups are backing a law now in Congress which would expand grandparents' rights and make the current state laws uniform across the country. But do grandparents always deserve to spend time with their grandchildren? There are plenty of people around who say they're keeping their kids away from the grandparents for legitimate reasons, and they fear that stronger grandparents' rights laws could do more harm than good.
You have the grandparents who feel they have their rights, parents who feel they have their rights, and sometimes in between all this, there's a certain amount of tunnel vision, and they forget about the children's rights. I just think if there wasn't a strong relationship before, that it certainly isn't going to be resolved afterwards through court battles, etc.
The kids sensed tension, and they were more or less clinging to me, and they were afraid. They backed off. They didn't want to be with their grandparents.
Like many newly divorced parents, Mary and Kate refused, at least for a while, to let their former in-laws see their children. One has since resolved the problem. The other is under court order to allow visits in her home. Neither wants to see grandparents given any more legal clout. But those who do choose to fight, rather than lose touch with their children's children, are convinced that they are right. With support groups like this, or on their own, they intend to continue their long and expensive legal battles.
We're very sure that it's good for the children not to lose other people who love them. They lost a mother. They've gained a new mother and some new grandparents. But that doesn't mean that they have to lose some other people who were part of a very important time in their lives.
There's a kind of smugness very frequently that exists for the people who are intact. They look at those who have been hit like we have by death or divorce or just alienation as being the lepers. We must have done something, and it will never happen to them. Well, all I can say is I thought it would never happen to me.
For the Independent News, I'm Karen Hasby.
Been a rather painful Thanksgiving for Kentucky Governor Martha Lane Collins. Her European tour was unexpectedly interrupted yesterday by 3.5 hours of surgery in a London hospital. Doctors removed part of her small intestine, which had been damaged by a jagged piece of glass resembling the rim of a bottle. Ms. Collins apparently swallowed the glass while she was eating. Tonight, the governor is still feeling some discomfort, but she's listed in good condition. Walter Fauntroy, the congressional delegate from the District of Columbia, is out of jail tonight. Fauntroy was arrested last night for staging a sit-in at the South African embassy. He was protesting South Africa's apartheid policies and the recent jailing of several black labor leaders there. Mary Berry of the Civil Rights Commission and lobbyist Randall Robinson were also arrested. All three could have been let go immediately, but to call attention to their cause, they insisted on spending the night in jail. Tonight, Fauntroy called that sit-in an act of conscience. For the first time since his assassination 21 years ago, there was no formal observance to honor John Fitzgerald Kennedy, our nation's 35th president. Nevertheless, in Washington, members of the Green Berets and Peace Corps laid wreaths at the JFK Memorial to pay tribute to the man who founded both those organizations. A few members of the Kennedy family were also on hand to pay their respects.